Colorado's Attorney General has a complex job protecting the legal rights of Coloradans. Consumer issues, protecting Colorado's land, water, and environment, standards for law enforcement, and defending Colorado's laws when they're challenged. But with crime rising, the race for Attorney General has focused on what the AG can and should do about an issue that's primarily handled by local law enforcement and prosecutors. Democratic Attorney General Phil Weiser is finishing his first term in office and is challenged by first-term Republican District Attorney John Kellner of Arapahoe, Douglas, Elbert, and Lincoln counties. They debate tonight on Next Presents The Race for Attorney General.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Kyle Clark alongside Marshall Zellinger. Attorney General Phil Weiser and District Attorney John Kellner, thank you both for being here, willing to debate your views today. A note for everybody watching at home, except for the introductions and the conclusions of our debates, we do not refer to the candidates using their elected or educational titles because you as voters will determine on Election Day who will hold the title Attorney General.
Candidates, you've agreed in advance to a few ground rules, 45-second answers, continued discussion at our discretion, and 1-minute closing statements, and a chance to ask each other a question as we continue this respectful dialogue to give voters information they need to make their decision.
So let's get started on the issue of crime. Mr. Weiser, you've called yourself Colorado's chief law enforcement officer. I remember a picture of you posing with a badge, but you haven't taken responsibility for rising violent crime in Colorado. How can you have that both ways?
It's important to distinguish between who's the chief law enforcement officer for the 18th Judicial District, Arapahoe County, and who is for the state. Everything in Arapahoe County, car thefts, drug dealing, violent crimes, is prosecuted by my opponent. I prosecute state crimes, like Medicare fraud, like organized crime. That is a critical distinction, because when you say, I'm worried about car thefts, where are they rising? Look at the DAs. They're rising twice as fast in my opponent's jurisdiction than the state as a whole. When you look at the state, you look at organized crime that we go after. You look at Medicaid fraud. So I have authority over a range of crimes where I'm the chief law enforcement officer. But my opponent and other DAs deal with a range of other violent crimes.
As somebody who has asserted kind of that broad position of authority on law enforcement, do you take any responsibility for rising crime in Colorado outside of what your office prosecutes?
We have tools that we are using. For example, we train police officers. And we went to the legislature and got millions of dollars for additional funds, for recruitment, retaining, and mental health support for police officers. And we're building, for the first time in 40 years, better police training. We also have gone to the legislature on a range of issues, like porch pirate theft, like catalytic converter theft, like fentanyl trafficking, and gotten new tools to address what are real challenges for Coloradans.
Thank you, Mr. Weiser. Mr. Kellner, to Mr. Weiser's point there, I have a question about, in your 4 counties, based on the stats from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, crimes against people have climbed in those counties while you've been DA. Are you responsible for that?
So crime has certainly gone up, not just in my district, but across the entire state, Marshall, and that's really the problem. What you fail to hear from Mr. Weiser is any sort of acceptance of his responsibility as the state's chief law enforcement official, as someone who should be standing up for the people and advocating for common sense, tougher on crime policies that's going to help us on the front lines, prosecutors and law enforcement, actually turn the tide. And I would simply tell you, Marshall, if you go to those statewide stats and you look at the crime rates for my counties, when you look at car theft, when you look at persons crimes and property crimes, they're actually lower than the entire metro area when you look at it per 100,000 people.
Let me flip it real quick. You're Attorney General. The Attorney General does not arrest anyone. Right now, you as a district attorney, you have the power to decide if someone's charged with a crime for those public safety issues. So how does an Attorney General lower the crime rate?
Has to use the bully pulpit, has to get in front of the legislature and say, look, what's happening right now is not working for the state of Colorado. And here's an example. My opponent advocated for a bill that lowered the penalties for car thieves at a time when we're #1 in the country for car theft. My opponent advocated for a bill that actually allowed convicted felons, including car thieves and drug dealers, to possess guns again at a time when we're facing a 25-year high in the violent crime rate. Now, the Attorney General has an obligation, and that's public safety, to stand up for the people and advocate for things that are going to help us hold people accountable.
Mr. Weiser, is your opponent mischaracterizing your record in any way there? He listed a number of specific things that you were on the record for.
Kyle, this is an important point. My opponent offered some deceptive attacks, not real solutions. That car theft law he talked about updated a law from 1999 that moved the dividing line between felonies and misdemeanors. It just went into effect last spring. That law is not responsible for car thefts.
Based on the value of the car,
That's
correct?
right.
All
It moves
please
it from
continue.
500 to 2,000, taking a 1999 law and updating it. It was supported bipartisan overwhelmingly by DAs. And now it's being cited as why we have car theft. We need to solve problems based on facts. We need to be honest in conversations. The other example he used is another deceptive attack. Take this question about who has access to weapons. There was a bill, it went through the process, unanimously supported by district attorneys of both parties, overwhelming bipartisan
Not by
support.
me.
It had 60 crimes that it said if you're having a gun, it's a felony. I want to add car thieves and drug dealers to that list, but I got 60 out of 62. That's a pretty good result for a bill. I took it. My opponent refused to support that bill. We got to solve problems together based on facts. These type of false attacks won't do it.
So, Mr. Kellner, you were pointing out that you disagreed with other Republicans on that bill specifically. Why do you think you were unable to convince them that you were right on that?
Yeah, this is a really big challenge because it started in the CCJJ. It's sort of a place where they bring together stakeholders to come up with bill ideas. I went to the CCJJ and I said, look, if you're going to reverse course on this law to keep convicted felons from possessing guns, you've got to include the top two public safety nexus crimes, things like car thieves and drug dealing when fentanyl is out of control in our state. I advocated there, and the Attorney General's own delegate, the person who voted in that CCJJ on the record, voted against that path. That stymied our ability, and as I went forward to the Capitol with chiefs of police from all across the state, we argued as strongly as we could to make that change. To hear him now say that he had somehow
Kellner,
supported
thank
it.
you. Mr. Weiser, you have said that Coloradans' rights are at risk if Mr. Kellner is elected. Which rights and how specifically would Mr. Kellner, as the Attorney General, go about stripping those rights?
I have a record of defending the rights of the people of Colorado, from consumer rights to reproductive rights, protecting our land, air, and water. My opponent in his campaign, look at his website. He doesn't talk about protecting those rights. He doesn't have a track record. We have, in my leadership, an enviable record of protecting people, of passing the Reproductive Health Equity Act, a law that I will defend, of addressing issues both at the national level and here in Colorado. So I'm running on my record and a proven record. When we look at my opponent's record, we don't have that comfort. My ask is, look at our record, judge me based on my record.
But what rights specifically do you think he would strip away? You're talking about what he emphasizes versus what he doesn't. What rights are at risk, and how would the AG go about taking them away?
We have, as a nation, a real challenge right now in the post-Dobbs world. Are we going to have attorneys generals advocating for reproductive rights, for the principles of Roe versus Wade, or advocating for the Dobbs decision, which says states have the rights to ban all abortions? Those issues will continue to be in litigation, both nationally and here in Colorado. I've got a proven track record on those issues. I've got a commitment to protecting reproductive rights. My opponent said he believes the Dobbs decision is correct, and the consequences from that decision are awful.
Mr. Kellner, I want to hear from you on the same subject. You said previously that you support the Dobbs decision returning abortion rights to the states, but you would defend Colorado's law protecting abortion access if it came to that, even though you don't personally support Colorado's abortion law. I want to ask you, if local jurisdictions in Colorado wanted to put their own restrictions on abortion to buck the state law, would you sue those jurisdictions into compliance?
Yes, I would. When I said that I would support the state law and defend it, I mean that. You know, this is the rule of law. This is what separates our country from so many other countries that I have seen as a Marine officer deployed overseas. You know, we have the rule of law for a reason. And I have pledged repeatedly that I would defend the Reproductive Health Equity Act. And in fact, it's really fear-mongering on the part of my opponent to say that somehow that law is at issue in the Attorney General's race when both he and I have pledged repeatedly to defend that law.
Let's continue, because I know this is a topic that is important to voters. You don't believe him when he says that? You think there's something in his record that suggests that he's not being honest? Where's the disconnect here?
Here's the disconnect, Kyle. When a candidate says, I don't believe in reproductive rights, when a
didn't say
candidate
that.
gets the endorsement of the NRA, we have to ask, should we trust that candidate to protect reproductive rights? My opponent was asked, are you pro-choice? It's a simple question, yes or no. I am. I believe in a woman's right to choose. On gun safety, I believe in protecting our gun safety laws, not the NRA's agenda.
On this topic, it's possible other states want to restrict people from leaving those states to get abortion access elsewhere. Colorado could be one of those places they come. You signed on, Mr. Weiser, to a nationwide letter this summer saying you would use discretion and decline to use your office resources to criminalize reproductive health decisions. That's not going to be an issue in Colorado because abortion access is protected in state law. But I need to ask you about this discretion. Do you support decisions by local law enforcement and DAs to not enforce laws that they disagree with?
There's a well-settled doctrine. It's prosecutorial discretion. Local district attorneys are elected saying what they're going to prioritize or not. And they're going to make judgments based on resources. That's the way our system works. I accept that. And when people say, I'm going to elect you, Phil Weiser, as Attorney General, because you're doing a great job going after fraud cases, you're doing a great job going after antitrust cases, you're doing a great job protecting against pollution, that's a choice they're making. What I can't do is do the job for district attorneys. If district attorneys fail to prosecute car theft effectively in some communities because they're focusing on other things, that's their decision.
But about discretion, when you sign on to this letter, how is it any different than a local sheriff saying, I'm not going to enforce the large capacity magazine ban, which you have defended in state Supreme Court, but it's they're saying, I'm not going to enforce that. How is it any different saying, well, I'm not going to enforce any restriction that might come our way from other states about abortion access?
I believe what I'm talking about is prosecutorial discretion. When someone says to me, will you work with other states to criminalize doctors and patients? I will say no. I will fight that with every tool I possibly can. Locally elected sheriffs and DAs are going to make their own decisions. That's part of our democratic process. What I can do, and what I have done, is work with them. For example, on the red flag law, a lot of them said, I don't know that I'm going to enforce it. We did a study on the red flag law in the first year. And of the 32 sheriffs who said they weren't going to enforce it, 20 have now used it because we've explained how important that law is and what good it can do.
Mr. Kellner, I want to go to Anusha Roy for our next question, and you'll hear it and see it on the monitors here.
It's been a long road, but money from the opioid settlement is now going to counties across the state. The need, though, is likely to outpace the money that is coming in. What do you think is the best way to spend these funds and where in Colorado?
That's a great question. I mean, it's likely that the need is going to outpace the amount of money that's been brought in that's coming out to local municipalities over the course of about 18 to 20 years. Now, one of the things that I think is really important about this process is that local areas are making these decisions about how to use this funding, because it's going to differ from place to place. You know, in Arapahoe County, we have medically assisted treatment in the jail, for instance, but there are probably more rural jurisdictions where they don't have that and they need it desperately. There's obviously a concern about the third wave of the opioid epidemic, fentanyl, and how it's impacting our kids and making it into the drug supply and where unsuspecting children are falling victim to it. So in other districts, it might be more important to raise awareness in the school system about the dangers of those future drugs.
How would you determine the allocation from the state to let the locals decide how they want to spend that money? How do you, as the Attorney General, say, okay, you're going to get this much, you're going to get this much?
That's already been predetermined based off of the formula that was agreed upon by the Attorney General and the local municipalities as to who's getting how much and over what time horizon.
Mr. Weiser, the best way to spend these funds?
Is the way we've done it. I want to explain what happened here because it's about the type of leadership I bring, collaborative problem solving. Before even we had the money, I sat down with local leaders all across the state, Republicans and Democrats, rural and urban, and we said we need a bottom-up solution. We created 19 regions to spend this money as the region saw fit. 90% of the money is going to the local level. Our job is to help them. That money is having an effect. We're set up to have treatment now in Southwest Colorado, in the San Luis Valley, in Northeast Colorado that has never had drug treatment recovery before. We have about 20% of the treatment that we need. I brought back this $520 million. We're putting it to work. It's going to save lives.
Well, on the topic of drug treatment, that we can transition to fentanyl here. Mr. Weiser, between 2000 and 2019, that's 2 decades, the state recorded 908 fentanyl-related deaths. In 2021 alone, it was 912. And halfway through 2022, 425 fentanyl-related deaths. You weighed in to support a pathway to supervised drug injection sites in Pennsylvania. If a local government in Colorado wanted to have supervised drug injection sites, would you support that?
I don't support supervised injection sites in Colorado. What I want to make clear is the action in Pennsylvania wasn't because I support those sites. It's because of a principle that states should be allowed to experiment. In Colorado, we have legal and regulated marijuana. At that time, Attorney General Jeff Sessions was attacking our system of legal and regulated marijuana. What I support is state authority to make decisions for themselves, to experiment. Colorado has the right to experiment. That was the principle I was advocating for. I don't support those sites.
But if you support it, if you don't support it in Colorado, why even get into the middle of something you didn't have to in Pennsylvania?
Because there's going to be law made all across the nation on this principle. Do states have the right to conduct experiments? Do they have the right to control their destinies? I want to make sure that legal principle supports Colorado's ability to have a legal and regulated marijuana market.
Mr. Kellner, do you support supervised drug injection sites?
No, I don't. And I think we've seen from a lot of the research that we see crime go up around these areas. And unfortunately, they've not been very effective in getting people addiction treatment and actually getting off of the substance abuse that's unfortunately ruining many of their lives. But to hear Mr. Weiser claim that he didn't actually support supervised injection sites doesn't make sense based off the record. There was no clamoring across our state for somebody to file a brief in Philadelphia to say, we support you in your effort to run supervised injection sites. In fact, it's the exact opposite. In Colorado, we heard an outcry that said, no, we don't want that here. We don't want it here in Denver in particular. And yet he still filed that brief and advanced that position because that is truly what he believes.
Do you think he's being disingenuous of his position right here?
I think he's changing his position to fit the mood right now.
Can I respond to that?
Please.
We had a press conference a year ago. I don't remember who asked me the question. It was when I was calling for action on fentanyl. And my answer then is the same as it was now. I don't support these sites. What I support is more drug treatment and recovery. The $520 million we're getting is going to save lives, but that's not enough money. I support more education and awareness. This fentanyl epidemic is a crisis. I've gone to work on it, including working on a law last year in the legislature to get more money for law enforcement, to go after those drug traffickers.
Another area, do you want to be heard on this one more time?
Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit more about fentanyl, what's going on here. I mean, Marshall, you mentioned over 900 Coloradans who lost their lives alone last year. We're on pace for over 1,500 this year in 2022. And in 2019, when the legislature was debating whether or not to decriminalize the possession of hard drugs like heroin, meth, cocaine, and yes, fentanyl, Mr. Weiser, as the chief law enforcement officer for this state, failed to go to the Capitol and didn't say a word against it.
I just want to point out on that stat, halfway through the year, 425 fentanyl-related deaths. That's according to the Colorado State Public Health and Health Department. You just said over 1,500. Do you have any stats the state doesn't have?
Absolutely. I've seen how this proceeds. We know, and I could tell you this from my experience being a district attorney, how backed up the coroner's offices are and the toxicology reports because of how overwhelmed they are with getting these unfortunate fentanyl overdose or fentanyl poisonings.
Mr. Weiser, I know this year you supported a bipartisan effort to increase the penalties for fentanyl possession. Why did you sit this issue out years ago when it was being debated in the legislature?
The earlier discussion in 2018 was a bill that I didn't support. I was focused on that time on our red flag law, making sure to get that passed. The 2019 bill was a bipartisan bill, and it's before we've seen the most recent rise in fentanyl. As we were doing this drug interdiction work in our office, we had a major case in Adams County, and for the first time, we saw these fentanyl pills getting trafficked, and we got to work on changing the law. We brought together a bipartisan coalition, Republican DAs, Democratic DAs, and we got the law changed.
So you said the reason why you didn't weigh in on the fentanyl decriminalization previously, or the lessening in criminal penalties for fentanyl earlier, is because you were focused on the red flag bill. I mean, fair to say you got a pretty large staff. You got to be able to do more than one thing at once, right? I mean, do you look back at that as an error?
So the problem, when you look back in hindsight, is you didn't have the information that we now have. As I got more information, I saw we had to change course. I made sure we did change course, and we did. The earlier bipartisan support for that bill is one that a lot of people probably say we didn't realize what was happening. What we need in Colorado is to look at the data honestly. Here's an example of dishonest discussion. I've heard from Republicans this fear-mongering, we're number 2 in fentanyl deaths. That's not true. We're number 26, which is awful.
I've heard other Republicans say that. Has your opponent said that?
No. I've said we have the second highest rate of fentanyl overdose increases.
That's the correct stat. It's looking at a smaller portion and an increase. Yeah, we're around halfway between the worst and the best states on those.
Right. But Republicans have been together, and I've not heard him correct other Republicans on this, because they've tried to make this about fear-mongering. This shouldn't be about fear. It should be about problem-solving. I've talked to moms who've lost their kids because someone took a Xanax pill that was fentanyl. and people who were struggling with drug addiction and overdosed. We need to come together to address this crisis with more treatment recovery. The $520 million we got. When I was running 4 years ago, my opponent said it'd be irresponsible to go after those drug companies. Well, I took them on, and we now have money to address drug treatment recovery in parts of our state that have never had it.
One last thought on this, then we're moving on to a different topic.
Sure, I appreciate that. It's so important to have an attorney general as the chief law enforcement officer who can be forward-looking. When I hear Phil say that he didn't see this crisis coming in 2019, we had rising deaths in 2018. We had those mothers crying out about losing their children to fentanyl. That's why this year when I went to the Capitol on the fentanyl accountability bill, I was saying, look, be forward-thinking about the next iteration of synthetic opioids and urge them to expand that bill to make sure we're covering what's coming and not just what's in front of us.
Let's talk about the role of the Attorney General in consumer protection. Mr. Kellner, do you have any concerns about the proposed merger of the parent companies of King Soopers and Safeway and what that would mean for grocery prices in Colorado? And in addition to that, what's one specific area of antitrust where you think the AG's office should be doing something that it's not now?
So a great question about the merger between King Soopers and Safeway, because I think as we look around right now, I mean, there's no question that we've got one of the highest rates of inflation across the entire country. My family, and I know many other families, were paying potentially hundreds of more dollars per month at the grocery store. So anytime you see something like this happening where you've got two large companies merging, you've got to be concerned about potentially losing some competition in the marketplace. And I share that concern that there might be an unfair situation presented to our consumers. So it's too early to say whether or not this is a good idea or if the Attorney General is going to step in and have some sort of authority over this merger, but it's certainly something to keep an eye on.
Should Coloradans be concerned that you lack experience in this area, somebody who's a criminal prosecutor and your opponent has deep experience here?
Sure. So, just to be really clear, I don't want to discount the fact that I've served 15 years in the Marine Corps as a judge advocate, as a lawyer, and had varied experience across all different levels. One of those things was actually advocating for service members in consumer fraud cases and predatory lending cases. I come to this with a great deal of experience, not just my criminal justice experience.
Mr. Kellner, thank you. Mr. Weiser, concerns about the proposed merger of the parent companies of Kings and Safeway, and an area where you would like to see your office be even more aggressive on antitrust?
I respect my opponent's background and experience, and I think it's being put to really good use right now as a criminal prosecutor. That's what his background. The Attorney General does not prosecute car thefts, but the Attorney General does address mergers. I have in the past addressed mergers, including one in Colorado Springs, where elderly Coloradans are going to have to pay more for their Medicare Advantage plans, more for health care. We took action in that merger. There was a merger in Grand Junction involving outdoor retailer stores. We took action there and stopped it. As for this merger, I do worry for consumers, for workers, and for competitors. I've got long experience enforcing antitrust laws. I'm a nationwide leader on this. In fact, I'm the nationwide leader for the states suing Google for their antitrust violations. I'm concerned about too much consolidation, squeezing consumers, and I fought for consumers and brought $230 million back.
Thank you, Mr. Weiser. We've had some impromptu back and forth. Now let's have the purposeful back and forth. Mr. Kellner, you have a question for Mr. Weiser?
Sure. Mr. Weiser, as we talked about earlier, you supported a bill that made it a misdemeanor to steal cars valued at $2,000 or less when it used to be a felony. You supported a bill that has allowed convicted felons, including drug dealers and car thieves, to possess guns again. Will you join me right now in calling upon the governor to call a special session to bring the legislators back under the Gold Dome to solve some of these public safety crises that we have in our state?
John, I want to start with the facts, and I've already mentioned what they are. That bill you're talking about moved the limit from 500, which was set in 1999, up to 2,000. I want to change it, but to say it's causing car thefts is just being deceptive to people. Let's be straight with people. I've also talked about the bill that firearms got 60 of them as felons can't possess them. I couldn't get the final two. We'll work on getting those. We can work the right way together, honestly, to solve problems. These deceptive attacks, they're not helpful, and they're not how we do business in Colorado. I am a collaborative problem solver. That's why my Republican predecessor, Cynthia Kaufman's, endorsed me. That hasn't happened too often. It happened here because of my approach.
So that's a no on special session?
We're going to get to this in the next session. We don't need to play a political game and have a special session.
Mr. Weiser, question for Mr. Kellner.
I talked about gun safety laws in Colorado. You filled out a survey and made certain commitments to the National Rifle Association that got you an A rating. They rated me an F because they know I'm a gun safety champion. My question is, will you release that questionnaire telling the voters of Colorado what commitments did you make to the NRA?
Yeah, so Phil, the reason why the NRA supports me is because I am somebody who's been involved in shooting sports my entire life, grew up skeet shooting and hunting. I'm a Marine and a Republican. I'm not surprised that the NRA would support me. Frankly, what you're missing here is that I am supported by the NRA because I want to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people who want to harm themselves or others, and dangerous criminals. You took the opposite side of that, Phil.
Is that a no, you won't release the questionnaire?
Phil, you know exactly what that questionnaire is about.
I don't know what's in it.
Did you not fill it out?
I didn't fill out an NRA questionnaire. I don't know what's in it. I don't know what you said. The public should know.
Is that why you have an F then?
I guess that's a no, similar to the no on the special session. One quick question before we get to closing statements here. I know, Mr. Weiser, you're currently running for Attorney General, so a simple yes or no to this. Do you want to be governor?
I want to be Attorney General. This is a dream job for me. It's a chance to use the law to serve. I'm going to work really hard to do this job with integrity, and I don't know what my future will hold, but right now it's all about how do I serve the people of Colorado as Attorney General.
So no.
This is my dream job. That's not my dream.
Mr. Kellner, you were elected as DA in 2020. Why have you not resigned that position if you really want to be Attorney General?
You know, this is so important to me because I did not run for district attorney with the idea that I would run for Attorney General. But as I looked around at the statewide problem with crime, and I see it impacting people in my community, I knew I had to do something. As I saw our Attorney General AWOL, absent without leave, when it comes to issues that are so important, that are impacting people's quality of life in our state, at that 25-year high for violent crime, #1 in the country for car theft, #1 in the country for bank robberies. The list goes on and on. I feel like every single day that I'm fighting for public safety here in the state, running for this office, I'm also fighting for the safety and well-being of the people in my district.
But it's a fallback position in case you don't win.
Well, I don't know about that. I'm certainly going to continue on as district attorney. I do love that job.
Each candidate will now make a 1-minute closing statement to voters. We determined the order via coin toss earlier. Mr. Kellner, you'll go first.
You know, right now, folks, people are opening up their mailboxes all across our entire state, and they're finding their ballot inside there, their ticket to democracy. And as people pull this ballot out and they start looking at the Attorney General's office and they wonder, you know, who should I vote for here? If they talk to their friends or their neighbors or around the kitchen table. Here's what I want them to think about. Do you feel safer today than you did 4 years ago when my opponent was elected to be the chief law enforcement officer? All across the state, I've heard that resounding answer being no, and they are ready for a change. They want to change the status quo. They're not happy with paying $5,000 a year in the cost of crime. They're unsatisfied with a 25-year high in the violent crime rate. They are tired of walking outside of their houses or apartments and finding their cars stolen. They want an Attorney General who's going to stand up and advocate for public safety. As a career law enforcement officer, that is exactly what I will do. I'd be honored to have their vote and support this November for Attorney General. Thank you.
Mr. Kellner, thank you. Mr. Weiser.
As your Attorney General, I'm the people's lawyer, which means I protect your rights. I protect our land, air, and water, and our safety. As Attorney General, I've been all in protecting our land, air, and water, fighting buy and dry plans, protecting the Colorado River. It's one of the most important issues we face. I promise to protect you as a consumer. Whatever merger comes up, whatever predatory actions companies take, we've already gotten $230 million back to consumers. On this opioid crisis, I've been all in, bringing back $520 million and counting, building these 19 regional collaboratives to provide more drug treatment and recovery services. I've worked hard with law enforcement on recruitment and training. How can we better serve our communities? I'll keep doing that. And I'll solve problems together. I'm not going to make false, deceptive claims. I'm not going to play political games. I'm going to work together. That's my Republican predecessor, Cynthia Kaufman, State Senator Don Corm, former Republican Speaker of the House, Russ George, all support me. I'd be honored to have your vote.
Mr. Weiser, thank you very much. Attorney General Phil Weiser, District Attorney John Kellner, thank you both for being here for this debate. This is the second in an unprecedented series of 6 debates being televised on 9 News this election year. We're bringing you debates in the races for Colorado's 7th and 8th congressional districts, Treasurer, Secretary of State, and the U.S. Senate, along with Attorney General here tonight. Democratic Governor Jared Polis agreed to debate, but his Republican challenger Heidi Ganahl declined our invitation. For the full schedule of debates and a link to this debate in full so you can share it with friends or family, text the word debate to 303-871-1491. Text debate to 303-871-1491. We'll text you back that full debate schedule. You can also watch the debate on 9 News Plus. Our next debate is tomorrow, Wednesday, October 19th, in the race for Colorado Treasurer. That's the debate between Democratic Treasurer Dave Young and Republican challenger Lang Sias. It'll air as part of Next at 6 p.m. on 9 News. For Marshall Zellinger and the whole 9 News team, I'm Kyle Clark. Thanks for being with us.